Nebraska, 1902. A cattle baron, his fortune vast, but his legacy barren after two failed marriages, stands in a dim warehouse where desperate women are sold like chattel. When the bidding for a woman, the doctors have declared sterile stalls at $20, Silas Redman shocks the room with a single offer. $1. One opportunity. One woman who would bear him 7 children and forever change the American West. This is their story, a transaction that became a dynasty. The Missouri River wind cut through Council Bluffs like a promise of winter, carrying on it the scent of stockyards and despair. Silas Redman stood in the shadows of Morton's warehouse, his broad shoulders squared in a coat that cost more than most men made in a year, and watched humanity at its lowest ebb. He shouldn't have come. "Mr. Redman, you don't have to stay for this," his foreman, Dutch Kellerman, muttered beside him. Dutch was a good man, loyal, quiet, and at this moment, looking anywhere but at the makeshift stage where women stood in a ragged line, each clutching a hand-scrawled number card. "We can leave right now. No one would think less of you." Silas said nothing. His pale gray eyes men said could freeze a river in July, remained fixed on the proceedings. At 42, Silas Redman was a man carved from Nebraska granite and a cattle-made fortune. He owned 18,000 acres of prime grazing land, employed 63 hands, and controlled the beef trade across 3 counties. Bankers vied for his deposits. Politicians sought his endorsement. Railroad magnates invited him into their private cars. And he was utterly, devastatingly alone. "Gentlemen," the auctioneer, a slick-haired man named Pritchard, called out, clapping his hands together. "Let's keep things moving, shall we? These fine women are seeking respectable marriages, and you fine gentlemen are seeking, well, domestic companionship. Everyone benefits from these arrangements. Everyone wins." Silas gritted his teeth. The euphemisms were almost more offensive than the raw truth. This was a meat market. Women with nowhere else to turn. Men too desperate or too damaged to find wives through conventional means. The matrimonial agency advertised itself discreetly in papers across the Midwest, promising practical unions for practical people. The women on that stage wore their desperation like ill-fitting clothes. Some were achingly young, barely out of their girlhood. Others were worn by hard years, their eyes hollowed by hunger or grief. A widow clutching a baby, a girl with a healing black eye. Each held her number card with hands that were either trembling or defiant, depending on what life had left in them. "Number 7, Pritchard announced. "Miss Sarah Clements, 19 years of age, an excellent cook, good with children." "She's with child herself," someone shouted from the crowd. "I am not," the girl cried, her face turning crimson. "Then why ain't you properly wed?" another voice jeered. Pritchard held up his hands. "Gentlemen, please. Miss Clements comes from a good Methodist family. Her father's farm failed, and she seeks a respectable Christian marriage. Shall we start the bidding at $40? Silas turned to leave. This was a fool's errand. He had only come because Dutch had mentioned it offhandedly 3 weeks prior. "Heard there's a matrimonial agency in Council Bluffs, boss, if you're still of a mind." And because Silas had spent another sleepless night in his 14-room house, with only the ticking of 7 different clocks for company. 2 marriages, 2 failures. 2 women who had looked at his money with bright eyes and at him with thinly veiled revulsion. Catherine, his first wife, had lasted 14 months before dying of complications from a miscarriage. She was 17, a railroad executive's daughter, who cried for her mother every night. Silas had tried to be kind, to be patient, but kindness was not his nature, and his patience had its limits. When she died, he'd felt more relief than grief, and had hated himself for it. Margaret had been a calculated choice, a practical, plain-faced widow of 30 from Omaha, who seemed to understand what marrying a man like Silas entailed. No romance, no illusions. She lasted 3 years before running off with a traveling salesman, leaving a note that said only, "I cannot breathe in your shadow." After that, Silas had given up trying. He'd built his empire instead, buying more land, breeding better cattle, expanding his horse program, making a fortune, and coming home every night to empty rooms, cold suppers, and the slow, crushing realization that all his wealth could not buy the one thing that mattered: an heir. Someone to carry on what he had built. Someone to justify the decades of brutal work, the sacrifice, the isolation. "Boss," Dutch touched his elbow, "I'm not buying a wife like a head of cattle, Dutch. Just look at her." Number 12. Silas looked. She stood at the end of the line, almost an afterthought in the auctioneer's excitement for the younger candidates. Late 20s, maybe 30. She was tall for a woman, coming near to his own shoulder, with dark auburn hair pinned in a simple knot. Her dress was mended but clean. Her posture was straight, despite an obvious weariness. But it was her face that held him. Strong-boned, intelligent, with the kind of beauty that age would only sharpen, not diminish. And her eyes, even from across the warehouse, he could see they were not the defeated eyes of the other women. They were watchful, assessing, calculating the odds with the cool pragmatism of someone who had long since stopped expecting mercy from the world. "Number 12, Pritchard finally called, his enthusiasm visibly flagging. "A Mrs. Evelyn Mercer, 28 years of age, a widow, experienced in household management and animal husbandry." "Why's she on that stage if she's so capable?" a man called out. Evelyn's expression didn't change, but Silas saw her fingers tighten on her number card. Pritchard cleared his throat, uncomfortable. Mrs. Mercer's late husband left her well, with debts rather than assets. She seeks a practical arrangement with a man of means who understands that matrimony is, at its heart, a partnership of mutual benefit. "What's wrong with her?" another voice demanded. "Woman that age ought to have 3 or 4 children by now." "She's barren." The word hung in the air like smoke. Several men who had been watching with interest immediately looked away. Barren. The kiss of death for a woman on that stage. No man wanted to pay good money for a wife who couldn't provide the most basic return on investment. "Her previous marriage was without issue," Pritchard admitted reluctantly. "Barren, I tell you," the heckler confirmed with satisfaction. "Not worth $10. Silas watched Evelyn's face as a ripple of dismissive chatter went through the warehouse. She did not flinch, or plead, or show any emotion at all. She simply stood there, holding her number card, waiting for what came next, with the tired dignity of one who had endured worse humiliations and survived them. Something in that stillness called to him. $20, Silas heard himself say. The warehouse fell silent. Every head turned to him. Silas Redman, the cattle baron, the man who owned half the county and could have his pick of any eligible debutante from Omaha to Denver, was bidding on a barren widow. Pritchard was the first to recover. "Mr. Redman, sir, $20 for number 12. An excellent choice. A woman of quality and experience." "15," someone countered nervously. "I'll go 15." The bid is 20, Pritchard announced. Any advance on $20? Silence. Men shuffled their feet, looked at Silas's imposing figure, and thought better of competing. Going once, going twice. Wait. Evelyn's voice rang through the warehouse, clear and steady. Before you finish that count, I have something to say. Pritchard blinked. Mrs. Mercer, that's not how this works. The gentleman has a right to know what he is buying. Evelyn looked directly at Silas for the first time, and he felt the impact of her gaze like a physical blow. There was intelligence there, and something else, a core of unbending, absolute honesty. I was married to Henry Mercer for 4 years. We had no children. A doctor in Chicago said my womb was tilted wrong, that I would never conceive. I am not certain he was correct. A gasp went through the room. Women did not speak of such things in public. Hell, women did not speak of such things at all. I can read, write, and do sums, Evelyn continued, her voice level. I can run a household of any size. I know how to slaughter a hog, birth a calf, and nurse a man through pneumonia. I do not complain, I do not gossip, and I do not steal. But I cannot promise you children, sir. If that is what you require above all else, you should save your $20. Pritchard looked as if he wanted to physically drag her from the stage. Several men were already turning their backs, heading for the door, muttering about wasted time. Silas took a step forward. The crowd parted for him instinctively. He was known to be intimidating, cold, ruthless. The men who worked for him knew not to meet his eyes when his temper was up. He had built his reputation on absolute control, zero tolerance for weakness, and the kind of unforgiving efficiency that turned dirt into gold. He stopped directly before the stage. Evelyn did not look away. You believe the doctor was wrong? Silas asked, his voice low. I believe doctors are men, Evelyn replied. And men are often wrong, but rarely in doubt. A ghost of something, amusement, respect, flickered across Silas's face. What makes you think you can carry a child? My mother had 8 children. My grandmother had 10. I was married to a man who drank himself sick most nights, a man who preferred the burn of whiskey to the warmth of his wife. A faint blush touched her cheeks, but her voice held firm. I am not saying I can give you sons, sir. I am saying the evidence against it is not conclusive. Why are you here, Mrs. Mercer? Why this? For the first time, a crack appeared in her composure. Because when Henry died, his creditors took everything. The farm, the stock, even my mother's wedding ring. Because I spent 3 months working in a laundry for wages that wouldn't feed a hut. Because winter is coming, and I have nowhere to go and no one to turn to. Because this, sir, is the only door left open to me. The warehouse was as quiet as a church. $20 is too much, Silas said. Evelyn's shoulders fell, just slightly. She gave a single nod, accepting defeat with the same dignity she'd maintained throughout. $1, Silas continued. Every man in that warehouse stared. Pritchard looked as if he'd been slapped. Dutch made a small, choked sound of surprise. $1, Silas repeated, his voice carrying to every corner. Not because you are worth less than 20, Mrs. Mercer, but because I will have no man, yourself included, believe I purchased you like livestock. $1 makes this transaction precisely what it is, a legal formality. A contract between 2 practical people entering into a practical arrangement. If you accept that dollar, You are accepting a marriage of honesty and partnership, nothing more and nothing less. Evelyn stared at him. For a long moment, the only sound was the wind rattling the warehouse windows. You want sons, Mr. Redman, she said, her voice now raw with desperation. I want a partner, Silas cut in. And you should know that for $1 or 20, I would expect you to give everything you have to try for them. But if your body does not cooperate, then we will face that together, as partners. Do you accept? Evelyn looked out over the warehouse, at the other women still standing on the stage, at Pritchard's scandalized face, at the men watching this strange negotiation with a mixture of awe and confusion. She looked down at her number card, number 12, and then at Silas's outstretched hand. I accept your dollar, Mr. Redman, she said clearly, and I will see to it you never regret spending it. They shook on it, like business partners, and a wave of astounded laughter rippled through the crowd. Pritchard stammered something about paperwork and fees and proper procedure, but Silas cut him off with a single look. We'll see to the legalities tomorrow, Silas said. Tonight, Mrs. Mercer is tired, and I have a home to return to. He looked at Evelyn. Do you have belongings? A valise. It is all I own. It is all you'll need. 20 minutes later, Evelyn sat in the back of Silas's carriage, her valise at her feet, watching Council Bluffs disappear into the darkness. Dutch drove, leaving Silas and Evelyn alone in the passenger compartment, with a single lantern swinging between them. For a long time, neither of them spoke. I should tell you about the house, Silas said at last. It's large, 14 rooms, most of them empty. I have a housekeeper, a Mrs. Shen, who comes 3 times a week. She is competent, but not warm. The cook, Marta, is warm but not particularly competent. You will have full authority over the running of the household, if you wish it. Or you can leave things as they are. Evelyn nodded slowly. What happened to your previous wives, Mr. Redman? You've heard of them. Everyone has. 2 dead wives are good fodder for gossip. Catherine died in childbirth. Margaret ran off with a salesman. Silas's voice was a monotone, devoid of emotion. Neither event was mysterious or suspicious, if that's what concerns you. I'm not concerned. Evelyn met his gaze. I am only trying to understand what sort of marriage you expect. Am I replacing Catherine or Margaret? Because I cannot be a girl who weeps for her mother, and I will not be a woman who suffocates in anyone's shadow. Silas studied her for a long moment. What sort of marriage do you expect, Mrs. Mercer? Honest work for honest pay, respect for competence. And if I give you children, sir, I expect them to know their mother is more than a broodmare. Fair terms. Silas extended his hand again. We have an agreement. They shook on it, a second time. And this time, as Evelyn's calloused hand met his, something passed between them. Something that felt dangerously like recognition. 2 people who had learned to survive without softness, meeting on the fringes of a world that had not been kind to either of them. You can call me Silas, he said, his voice low. We're either married or we will be by tomorrow. We may as well use first names. Evelyn. I know. I was listening. A faint smile touched Evelyn's lips. You paid attention to a barren widow at an auction. Does that make you extraordinarily kind or extraordinarily desperate? I am not a kind man, Silas said. Then we are both desperate. Evelyn looked out at the rushing darkness. That's something. Desperation, at least, is honest. It's something else, too. Silas's voice was barely a whisper over the clatter of the carriage wheels. It's the foundation of every great partnership. Two people with nothing left to lose and everything to gain. Is that what we are now? Partners? That's what I paid my dollar for, Evelyn. The question is whether that's enough. The carriage rattled on through the Nebraska night, carrying them toward a house that would become a home, a transaction that would become a dynasty, and a love that neither of them expected but both would fight to keep. In the darkness, Evelyn's hand found Silas's and held it. Not romantically, not tenderly, but with the firm grip of an equal acknowledging an equal. Partners in a dangerous venture. Survivors who had found each other in the last place either expected. Your dollar is enough, she said. For now, it is enough. But they both knew, even then, that nothing about this arrangement would remain simple. Nothing about these two complicated, wounded, desperate people could ever remain transactional. The dollar was only the beginning. The Redman house rose from the prairie like a monument to ambition. 3 stories of white brick and black shutters that caught the first light of dawn as their carriage rolled up the long drive. Evelyn had dozed fitfully for the last few hours of the journey, her head resting against the carriage wall, and she woke to see her new home emerging from the morning mist, like something from a fever dream. It's bigger than the hotel in Council Bluffs, she said softly. Silas, who had not slept at all, regarded the house with the detached appraisal of a man seeing a property, not a home. It was built for a family. It currently houses 1 man, a housekeeper, a cook, and enough empty rooms to hold an echo. The carriage drew to a halt at the main entrance, and Dutch climbed down to open the door. Evelyn stepped out onto the gravel, which crunched beneath her worn boots. She was suddenly and acutely aware of how she must look. Travel-stained, exhausted, carrying everything she owned in a single carpet bag. The front door opened, and a small Chinese woman in her 50s appeared, her face a mask of careful neutrality. "Mrs. Shen," Silas said, his tone formal. "This is Mrs. Mercer. We are to be married this afternoon at the courthouse. Please have the blue room prepared for her use." Mrs. Shen's eyes flickered to Evelyn, taking in every detail with the swift efficiency of long practice. "Yes, Mr. Redman. Will Mrs. Mercer require breakfast?" "I would appreciate that," Evelyn said before Silas could answer. "Thank you." Something shifted in Mrs. Shen's expression. Approval, perhaps, or at least acknowledgement. She gave a single, sharp nod and disappeared back into the house. Silas gestured for Evelyn to follow, and she crossed the threshold into her new life. The interior matched the ambition of the exterior. High ceilings, polished floors, furniture that looked both expensive and uncomfortable. Everything was clean, orderly, and utterly devoid of personality. It was a house that had never been a home. Rooms that had never heard a child's laughter, a woman's song, or any of the small sounds that make a space lived in, rather than merely occupied. "The parlor is through there," Silas said, gesturing to a room with stiff-backed chairs arranged like soldiers on parade. "Dining room is through that door. My study is forbidden. I keep the business ledgers there. Kitchen is in the back. Bedrooms are upstairs. The blue room has its own washroom. You'll have your privacy." Evelyn turned to him. "And where do you sleep?" "In the master bedroom, in the east wing, across the hall from the blue room, but a good distance down. That is intentional." Silas's jaw was tight. "I will not force myself on you, Evelyn. You agreed to a practical arrangement. When and if we consummate this marriage, It will be because we have both decided it is appropriate, not before. We want children, Evelyn said bluntly. That requires consummation. Placing me on the opposite side of the house seems counterproductive. A muscle jumped in Silas's cheek. I am trying to be respectful. I appreciate that. But let's make one thing clear. Evelyn set down her bag and faced him squarely. I did not accept your dollar to be treated like a piece of porcelain that might break. I am not Catherine, weeping for my mother. I am not Margaret, looking to be smothered. I am a widow who understands exactly what marriage entails, including its most intimate aspects. If you want heirs, Silas, at some point you will have to stop being so damned respectful. Silas stared at her. In 36 hours, he had seen this woman stand on an auction block with her dignity intact, negotiate her own sale with brutal honesty, endure a sleepless night in a carriage without complaint, and now calmly discuss marital relations in his entryway as if she were talking about crop rotation. He had expected many things from this bargain. He had not expected to feel respect. You are not what I thought you were, he said finally. Neither are you. Evelyn picked up her carpet bag. Now, where is this blue room? I'd like to wash before breakfast. Apparently, we have a wedding to attend this afternoon. Mrs. Shen appeared silently in the hall, her face still carefully neutral. I will show you upstairs, Mrs. Mercer. Evelyn followed her up the grand staircase, leaving Silas standing alone in his empty house, wondering what, exactly, he had brought back from Council Bluffs. Not a desperate woman grateful for rescue, not a submissive wife who would fade into the wallpaper, but something else entirely. Something that might actually change the carefully controlled emptiness he had built around himself. The thought should have terrified him. Instead, he felt something he hadn't in years. Anticipation. The courthouse ceremony that afternoon was as practical and emotionless as the agreement between them. Judge Whitmore, who had handled Silas's legal affairs for 15 years, performed the service efficiently in his chambers. Dutch and the court clerk served as witnesses. The entire affair took 7 minutes. You may kiss the bride, Judge Whitmore said, without enthusiasm. Silas looked at Evelyn. She looked back. By unspoken agreement, they shook hands. That's not traditional, the judge observed. Neither is this marriage, Silas replied. But it is legal, and that is all that matters. They signed the certificate, paid the fee, and walked out as Mr. and Mrs. Silas Redman. In the carriage on the way home, Evelyn examined the plain gold band Silas had placed on her finger. He'd purchased it that morning while she was bathing and changing into the one good dress in her bag. It fits, she said. I estimated. You have practical hands. Not small, not large. Is that a compliment or an observation? I'm not good at compliments, Evelyn. I'm good at observations, assessments, strategies. If you're expecting pretty words and romantic gestures, you will be disappointed. I'm expecting honesty and respect, Evelyn said. Romance is for people who can afford illusions. We cannot. No, Silas agreed quietly. We cannot. That evening, Evelyn learned the true geography of her new life. The house was even larger than she'd first imagined, with rooms that served no purpose and hallways that led nowhere in particular. She found the kitchen, where Marta, the cook, was a plump woman in her 60s who seemed delighted to finally have another woman in the house. Thank heavens, Marta said, wiping her hands on her apron. I've cooked for that man for 13 years, and he eats like he's taking medicine. No joy, No appreciation, just fuel. Perhaps now we'll have proper meals instead of slabs of meat and boiled potatoes. Mr. Redman doesn't care for fine food? Evelyn asked. Mr. Redman doesn't care for anything that isn't cattle or land. Marta lowered her voice conspiratorially. Between you and me, Mrs. Redman, that man needs more than a wife. He needs a reason to be human again. 2 failed marriages will do that to a person. Turn them to ice. But you've got a fire in you. Maybe you can thaw him out. Evelyn wasn't sure about thawing, but she understood survival, and survival meant establishing her place in this house quickly and firmly. For the next 3 days, she began a silent inventory of everything: the household supplies, the schedules, the inefficiencies. She watched as Mrs. Shen cleaned the same rooms over and over because there was nothing else to clean. She noted that Marta prepared elaborate meals that Silas consumed without comment. She observed the ranch hands who came to the house for instructions, the way they spoke to Silas with respect, but not warmth, with fear, but not loyalty. She saw an empire held together by one man's iron will, with no foundation beyond his own relentless control. On the 4th night, she found Silas in his study, working by lamplight, though it was past 10. She knocked on the doorframe. "I said this room was forbidden," Silas said, not looking up from his ledgers. "You also said I had authority over the running of the house. I need to discuss the accounts." He looked up then. "What accounts?" Evelyn walked in and placed a sheet of paper on his desk. "Marta has been ordering provisions for a household of 15. We are feeding 3 people and a few occasional ranch hands. Mrs. Shen cleans empty rooms twice a week that haven't been used in years. You are paying for services you do not need and wasting resources on maintenance that serves no purpose. I've calculated we can reduce household expenditures by 30% with no loss of quality or comfort." Silas studied the paper, his expression unreadable. "You've been here 4 days. Long enough to see waste, unless you enjoy spending money needlessly." "I enjoy nothing needlessly." Silas put down his pen and leaned back in his chair, regarding her with those pale gray eyes. "Are you proposing to take over the household management entirely?" "I am proposing to do what you told me I could do. Manage a household of any size. Right now, this house is managed more for appearance than for function. That may have made sense when you were trying to impress wives who cared for such things. I do not. I care about efficiency." A ghost of a smile touched Silas's face. "Are you criticizing the way I run my own home?" "I am observing inefficiencies. Would you prefer I pretend not to notice them?" "No." Silas pulled the paper closer, studying the neat columns of figures. "No, I would not." "Very well, Mrs. Redman. The household is yours. Make the changes you see fit. I will expect the savings you've promised." "You'll have them." Evelyn turned to leave, then stopped. "One more thing." "Yes?" "You cannot build a legacy by working 16 hours a day and sleeping 4. Whatever it is you are trying to prove to yourself, it isn't sustainable. You require rest, proper meals, and the occasional human interaction that does not involve the price of cattle." Silas's expression hardened. "I will manage my own schedule. And I will manage the house, which includes ensuring its occupants remain healthy enough to occupy it. This is my job now, Silas. You hired me for this. Let me do it." They stared at each other across the desk. A silent standoff, neither willing to yield. Finally, Silas gave a single sharp nod. You're remarkably bold for a woman who arrived with nothing but a travel-worn suitcase. I didn't arrive with nothing, Evelyn countered, her voice even. I arrived with skill, intelligence, and an agreement that we would be partners. And partners tell each other uncomfortable truths. You'd best get used to it. She left him sitting there. Silas found himself staring at the closed door, a swirl of emotions he couldn't quite name rising in his chest. Irritation, certainly, but also respect, and something else that felt dangerously close to admiration. The next morning, when he came down for breakfast, he found the dining room transformed. Fresh flowers, wild prairie roses that must have taken some effort to find, sat in a vase on the table. The heavy curtains were drawn back, letting the morning sun spill into the room, and the meal itself looked appetizing. Not merely functional. There were eggs cooked with cream and herbs, fresh bread still warm from the oven, and coffee that didn't taste as though it had been boiled for hours. Evelyn sat across from him, eating calmly, as if this were not a quiet revolution. Marta is pleased to be cooking properly for a change, she said. Mrs. Shen has been reassigned to projects that actually need doing, and I've given them both a half day off each week. You were working them 7 days without rest. That isn't efficiency, Silas. It's cruelty. Silas set his fork down. You've been here less than a week, and you're already restructuring my entire household. Yes. Is there a problem? No. He picked his fork up again and tasted the eggs. They were good. Better than good. When was the last time he'd actually savored a meal? No problem at all. Carry on, Mrs. Redman. But that night, when Evelyn retired to her room, she found a small, plainly wrapped package on her bed. Inside was a book, a new edition of agricultural science journals from the university. There was no note, no explanation. Just an acknowledgement that she could read, that she was interested in such things, that someone had noticed. She sat on the edge of the bed, holding the book, and felt a small crack appear in the careful walls she had built around her heart. By the end of the second week, a rhythm had settled over the house. Silas rose at dawn and worked until dusk, returning for meals that Evelyn ensured were served at regular, civilized hours. She managed the household with a quiet efficiency, solving problems before they became crises, anticipating needs before they were ever voiced. The house slowly began to feel less like a sterile museum and more like a place where people actually lived. But at night, they remained at opposite ends of the long, silent hallway. The practical need that had brought them together, children, heirs, hung between them like a persistent fog. It was Evelyn who finally broke the silence. She found Silas in the library one evening, poring over ledgers by the light of a single lamp. She entered without knocking, closed the door behind her, and said simply, "We need to discuss the situation." Silas looked up, his eyes weary. What situation? The situation in which we are married, supposedly trying for a child, yet have not touched one another beyond that handshake in Council Bluffs. She took the chair opposite him. I understand you're trying to be respectful. I appreciate that. But at a certain point, respect becomes avoidance, and avoidance will not get you the heir you need. Silas's jaw tightened. What precisely would you have me do? Schedule our marital relations as if they were business appointments. I would have you acknowledge that this aspect of our marriage cannot be ignored indefinitely. We are adults. We understand biology. Assuming I am not barren, and we won't know unless we try, then trying requires certain actions. Evelyn. Silas stood abruptly, and walked to the window, his back to her. You speak of it as if it's crop rotation. Would you prefer I stammer and blush and pretend to be shocked by the concept of marital intimacy? Evelyn rose and joined him by the window. I am 28 years old. I was married for 4 of them. I am not ignorant, Silas, and I am not fragile. I am practical. Practical? He gave a short, humorless laugh. Is that what we're calling it? What would you call it? He turned to face her, and for the first time since they had met, she saw raw emotion in his eyes. Frustration, desire, and beneath it all, something that looked like fear. I'd call it complicated, he said, his voice low. Catherine, she was terrified of me. Every time I touched her, she would flinch. And Margaret tolerated it. Barely. She would lie there like a corpse and count the seconds until I was finished. You talk about this like simple mathematics. But it isn't. It's 2 people in a bed together. And I have no reason to believe I will be any better at pleasing you than I was at pleasing them. The honesty of it silenced her. She had expected resistance, perhaps, or awkwardness. Not this raw admission of inadequacy from a man who seemed so unshakable in every other facet of his life. I was not happy in my own marriage bed, she said finally. Henry was either drunk or angry, or both. It was a duty I performed, nothing more. I don't expect poetry or passion from you, Silas. I expect the same thing I expect from every other aspect of our partnership. Honest effort and mutual respect. That is all. It is all I require. She met his gaze squarely. I don't need you to be a romantic hero. I need you to be a partner who is willing to try. We can figure out the rest as we go. Silas studied her face in the lamplight. She didn't look away, didn't blush, gave no indication that this conversation embarrassed or frightened her. Just practical, honest Evelyn, solving another problem with the same direct efficiency she applied to everything else. All right, he said quietly. When? That is up to you. Tonight, then, if you are willing. Evelyn nodded once. I am willing. They stood there for an awkward moment, unsure how to bridge the gap from negotiation to intimacy. Finally, Silas held out his hand. Evelyn took it. His palm was warm against hers, calloused from work, but his grip was steady. Together, they walked through the quiet house and up the stairs, past the empty rooms and silent corridors, to the master bedroom Silas had occupied alone for so many years. He lit the lamp by the bed with hands that were not entirely steady. Evelyn closed the door and, with the same practical efficiency she applied to every task, began to unbutton her dress. Wait, Silas said. She paused, her hands at the collar. I want to, he said softly. If you don't mind. I don't want this to feel like a transaction. It is a transaction, Evelyn replied gently. But that doesn't mean it can't be kind. She stood still as he came to her, his large hands surprisingly deft as they worked the tiny buttons of her dress. He was careful, methodical, treating the fabric as if it were precious, rather than the worn garment of a woman who'd arrived with a single suitcase. When the dress finally pooled at her feet, leaving her in her chemise and stockings, Silas drew in a sharp, audible breath. What is it? Evelyn asked. You're beautiful, he said simply. I should have said it before. You are beautiful, and I am glad you are here. It wasn't poetry, but it was sincere, and sincerity was what they had promised each other. Evelyn reached up and touched his face, feeling the scrape of his stubble and the tension in his jaw. "I'm glad too," she said. "Now show me that all this brooding intensity translates to something more useful than frightening the ranch hands." He laughed, a real laugh, and the sound transformed his face, making him look younger, lighter. Then he kissed her, and Evelyn discovered there was a world of difference between her first husband's sloppy, drunken fumbling and the careful, thorough attention of a man who did nothing by halves. What followed was awkward in moments. They were, after all, still strangers, but it was also surprisingly tender. Silas proved to be a considerate lover, attentive to her responses in a way that suggested he had been telling the truth about his previous marriages. He hadn't known how to please them, but he was willing to learn, willing to wait, willing to try. And Evelyn, who had spent 4 years enduring rather than enjoying her wifely duties, found that partnership in the bedroom worked much the same as partnership anywhere else. With honest communication, mutual respect, and a willingness to see each other as equals, not adversaries. Afterward, they lay in the darkness, not touching, but no longer separated by the length of a hallway. "That wasn't terrible," Evelyn said into the quiet. She felt his chest rumble with a silent laugh. "High praise. I am being honest. It wasn't terrible. Some parts were even quite good." "Which parts?" His voice was one of genuine curiosity, not masculine pride. "The parts where you paid attention." She shifted onto her side to face him. "The parts where you acted as if my pleasure was just as important as your own." "It is." Silas reached out, a hesitant motion, and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "If we're going to do this, really do this, it has to be important to both of us." "Then we are in agreement?" "It seems we are in agreement about a great many things." His fingers traced the line of her jaw with a surprising gentleness. "You are nothing like I expected, Evelyn Redman." "Nor you, Silas Redman." They fell asleep like that, not embracing, but no longer strangers. Two practical people who had made a practical arrangement and were discovering that practicality did not preclude tenderness. The next morning, Evelyn woke in the master bedroom as dawn light filtered through the curtains. Silas was already awake and dressed, sitting in the chair by the window, watching her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. "How long have you been staring?" she asked, her voice thick with sleep. "I wasn't staring. I was observing." "And what did you observe? That I snore a little? That I steal the blankets?" He rose and came to sit on the edge of the bed. "I observed that you look younger when you sleep." He paused. "And I would like you to move your things from the blue room in here, if you agree." Evelyn pushed herself up, clutching the sheet to her chest. "We are married, Silas." "We've been married for 2 weeks," he said, his hand finding hers under the covers. 2 weeks of unnecessary distance between partners. I'm not asking for love, Evelyn. I'm asking for proximity. I am asking to wake up next to the person I am building this life with. Is that too much to ask?" "No," she said softly. "No, it is not too much to ask." And so her things were moved. The single suitcase that held her entire life was unpacked into drawers and a wardrobe next to Silas's expensive but austere clothing. The blue room was empty once more. But this time the emptiness felt different, like a door closing on the past, rather than a future wasted. As autumn deepened into winter, the household settled into its new patterns. Evelyn ran the home with quiet authority, implementing changes that increased efficiency without sacrificing comfort. The ranch hands began to seek her out, with small queries rather than always troubling Silas. Marta's meals became events to be savored. Mrs. Shen even began to smile occasionally, a rare sight that Silas attributed entirely to Evelyn's practical kindness. And at night, Silas and Evelyn explored their partnership in the privacy of the master bedroom, learning each other's bodies and rhythms with the same methodical attention they gave everything else. It was not passion in the romantic sense, not the all-consuming fire poets wrote of, but it was warm and comfortable and increasingly satisfying for them both. 6 weeks after their wedding, Evelyn's monthly courses did not come. She waited another 2 weeks to be certain, consulting the medical books she found in Silas's library before she said a word. Then, one morning over breakfast, she set down her fork and said simply, "I believe I'm pregnant." Silas froze, his coffee cup halfway to his lips. "Are you certain?" "As certain as I can be without a physician's examination. All the signs are there." He set the cup down carefully, as if he feared any sudden movement might shatter the moment. The doctor in Chicago, he was wrong. The doctor in Chicago was an arrogant fool who made assumptions based on insufficient evidence. Evelyn's hand moved unconsciously to her stomach. Or perhaps I just needed the right partner. Something shifted in Silas's face. Joy, fear, hope, all of it mixed into an expression so vulnerable it made Evelyn's throat tighten. This man, this cold cattle baron who terrified half the county, looked as though he might weep. "We need to get you to a doctor," he said, his voice rough. "A good one. From Omaha, or even Chicago, if we must. Someone who knows what they're doing." "Silas, women have been having babies since the beginning of time without—" "Not you," he cut in, his voice firm. "You will have the best care available." He was on his feet now, already planning, the master of his domain once more. "I'll send Deutsch to Omaha today. There's a doctor there, a Dr. Hartwell. He handled some complicated matters for the governor's wife. He will know what you need, how to make sure that everything goes right." "Silas." Evelyn rose and took his hands, interrupting his anxious planning. "Breathe. We still have months. There's time." "Catherine died," he said bluntly. "She was with child, young and healthy, and she still died. I won't let that happen to you." "You can't control everything, Silas. Not even with all your money and all your plans." "I can try." His hands tightened on hers. "I can damn well try." So, Dr. Hartwell was summoned from Omaha, a competent man in his 50s who examined Evelyn thoroughly. He declared her sound, the pregnancy progressing normally, with no sign of the complications that had claimed Catherine. He gave instructions on diet and rest, prescribed various tonics and supplements, and promised to return for monthly examinations. "Your wife is a strong woman," he told Silas in private. "Good bones, a good constitution. Barring any unforeseen complications, she should do just fine. But I'll be frank, Mr. Redman. Childbirth always carries risk. No amount of money or medical attention can eliminate it entirely." "Then we will minimize it as much as humanly possible," Silas replied. "Whatever she needs, doctor. No matter the cost." But what Evelyn needed wasn't expensive medical care or elaborate precautions. She needed work, usefulness, the sense of purpose that had sustained her through every hardship. The pregnancy barely slowed her down. She continued to manage the household, despite Silas's repeated attempts to convince her to rest more. "You're carrying my son," he would argue. "You should be in bed with your feet up, not taking inventory of the pantry." Your son is the size of a plum and is perfectly content to accompany me as I work, Evelyn would retort. I'm with child, Silas, not at death's door. Stop treating me as if I'm made of glass. I'm trying to take care of you. Then take care of me by treating me like a partner, not a patient. It became a recurring argument between them. Silas's overwhelming need to protect clashed with Evelyn's equally strong need for autonomy. But even their arguments now held a warmth, an underpinning of mutual care that transformed the disagreement into something almost affectionate. The ranch hands noticed the change in their boss. Silas still drove them hard, still demanded excellence, but there was less anger in it now. He came home for meals. He occasionally smiled. He even told a joke once which so shocked Dutch that the foreman nearly fell off his horse. Marriage suits you, boss, Dutch ventured one day as they inspected the northern pastures. Marrying the right woman suits me, Silas corrected. Turns out, it wasn't marriage that was the problem. It was the wrong choice. You think Mrs. Redman made a wrong choice too? Ending up with a hard man like you? Silas gave it some thought. I think she chose survival. Everything else, myself included, is a bonus she's choosing to make the best of. That's why it works, Dutch. We're both practical about what this is. But even as he said it, Silas knew it wasn't entirely true anymore. What had started as a practical arrangement was becoming something else. Something that felt dangerously close to the partnership he claimed to want, but had never truly believed was possible. Winter arrived with brutal cold and heavy snows that isolated the ranch for days at a time. Evelyn, now visibly pregnant, spent her evenings in the library with Silas. They would work in companionable silence on their separate projects. He on his ledgers and breeding records, she on the household accounts and the books she'd borrowed from his extensive collection. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes they sat in comfortable silence. Invariably, Silas would find his attention drifting from his work to watch her. The way the lamplight caught the fire in her auburn hair, the unconscious way her hand rested on her growing belly, the small smile that curved her lips when she came across something particularly interesting in her reading. You're staring again, she said without looking up. Observing. And what are you observing now? That I am a fortunate man. The words were out before Silas could stop them, more honest than he'd intended. That I paid $1 for the best investment I ever made. Evelyn finally looked up, her eyes soft in the lamplight. That's almost romantic, Mr. Redman. Don't get used to it. I'm still not one for pretty words. No, she agreed, setting her book aside and rising with some effort. The pregnancy was making her movements slower, more deliberate. But you're getting better at the honest ones. She crossed the room to his desk and held out her hand. Silas took it, letting her pull him to his feet, and followed her from the library to the bedroom they now shared, without question or hesitation. And there, in the privacy of their partnership, they continued the slow, complicated process of turning a transaction into something that looked remarkably like love, even if neither of them was quite ready to call it that. Because to call it love would be to admit vulnerability, to admit need, to admit that this practical arrangement had become the most important thing in their carefully constructed lives. And neither of them was quite ready for that truth just yet. But it was coming, as inevitable as spring after winter, as certain as the child growing in Evelyn's womb. Money had bought them a beginning. What they built from it would cost them both far more, and give them everything they'd never dared to dream of asking for. The baby came on a brutally cold morning in March, 3 weeks before Dr. Hartwell had predicted. Silas was in the south pasture, dealing with a broken fence line, when Dutch came galloping over the frozen ground, his horse's breath pluming white in the air. "Mrs. Chen says it's time, boss. The baby's coming." Silas had no memory of the ride back to the house. One moment he was in the pasture. The next he was bursting through the front door, his heart hammering against his ribs as if trying to escape his chest. Martha met him in the hall, her face flushed from running up and down the stairs. "Dr. Hartwell isn't here yet," she said, breathless. "Dutch sent someone for him, but with these roads—" "Where is she?" Silas demanded. "Upstairs. Mrs. Chen is with hers, and I'm boiling water, but Mr. Redman, she's asking for you." Silas took the stairs 3 at a time. He found Evelyn in their bedroom, pacing beside the bed, one hand pressed to the small of her back, the other gripping the bedpost. Mrs. Chen hovered nearby with an armful of clean linens, her usually impassive face tight with concern. "You shouldn't be in here," Evelyn said when she saw him, her voice strained. "Men don't attend births. Men who paid $1 for their wives can damn well attend whatever they please." Silas went to her side. "Is it very bad?" "It's childbirth, Silas. It's supposed to hurt." Another contraction seized her, and Evelyn's fingers tightened on the bedpost until her knuckles were white. She breathed through her clenched teeth, and Silas felt utterly, completely helpless. He could negotiate million-dollar cattle deals without breaking a sweat. He could face down rustlers, rival ranchers, and railroad tycoons. But watching Evelyn in pain rendered him powerless. "Dr. Hartwell will be here soon," he said, knowing it was a useless comfort. "The baby doesn't care about Dr. Hartwell's schedule." Evelyn's laugh was half a gasp. She turned to her housekeeper. "Mrs. Chen, how many births have you attended?" "7, the housekeeper replied. "In China, before I came here." "Then you know what to do better than any of us. Tell me what you need." Mrs. Chen's expression shifted from worry to resolve. She began issuing clipped instructions to Martha, who hurried to obey. Silas stood frozen until Evelyn reached out and seized his hand, her grip surprisingly strong. "Don't you dare faint," she said. "I need you here. I need you to be steady." "I'm here." He brought her hand to his lips. "I'm not going anywhere." The next 4 hours were the longest of Silas's life. Dr. Hartwell arrived after 2 of them, took one look at the situation, and declared that Mrs. Chen had everything well in hand. The birth was proceeding normally, if slowly. All they could do was wait and let nature take its course. Silas hated waiting. He hated not being able to fix or control or manage what was happening. But he stayed by Evelyn's side, letting her squeeze his hand hard enough to leave bruises, wiping her brow with cool cloths, murmuring words of encouragement that felt inadequate but were all he had to offer. "This is your fault," Evelyn gasped out at one point, and Silas couldn't tell if she was serious or attempting humor through the pain. "I know, I'm sorry." "Don't be sorry. Just promise me." She broke off as another contraction ripped through her. "Promise me that if something happens, you'll take care of the baby." "Nothing is going to happen," Silas said fiercely. "You're strong, Evelyn. Stronger than anyone I've ever known. You will get through this, and we will raise this child together. Promise me anyway." "I promise. But you're going to be fine. You have to be." His voice broke. "I can't do this without you." Evelyn's eyes met his, and something passed between them that needed no words. Then Mrs. Chen was there, telling Evelyn it was time to push, and everything else faded away. The boy arrived just as the sun was setting, filling the room with golden light and lusty cries. Dr. Hartwell caught him, cleared his airways, and laid him on Evelyn's chest as she sobbed with relief and exhaustion. "He's perfect," the doctor announced. 10 fingers, 10 toes, excellent lungs. Congratulations, Mr. and Mrs. Redman. Silas looked at his son, and felt something fundamental shift in his understanding of the world. This small, red-faced creature, wailing his displeasure at being born, was everything Silas had worked for, everything he had built, everything he hoped to achieve. An heir, a legacy, a future. "He needs a name," Evelyn said softly, her fingers exploring the baby's downy head. "What do you want to call him?" "I was thinking of Thomas, for my father." She looked up at Silas. "If that's acceptable." "Thomas Redman." Silas reached out a tentative hand and touched his son's tiny clenched fist. The baby's fingers immediately wrapped around one of his, and Silas felt his throat tighten. "It's perfect." Dr. Hartwell finished tending to Evelyn, declared her recovery to be excellent, and left detailed instructions for the coming weeks. Martha and Mrs. Chen fussed over the new mother and baby with evident joy. Dutch and the ranch hands celebrated in the bunkhouse with whiskey and cigars, and Silas sat by the bed where his wife and son slept, watching them in the lamplight, and marveling at how his carefully controlled life had been so completely and wonderfully upended by a woman he had bought for $1. The rumors began 3 weeks later. Silas first heard them at the bank in town, where he'd gone to discuss expanding his breeding program. Henry Morrison, who had handled the Redman accounts for a decade, mentioned it casually as they reviewed paperwork. "Congratulations on the new arrival, by the way. Quick work, wasn't it? You've only been married, what? 6 months?" "7," Silas replied, his voice cold. "My son was born right on time." Of course, of course." Morrison's smile was slick. "It's just, people have been counting the months, you see, wondering if perhaps Mrs. Redman was already carrying when you married her. It would explain that unusual business with the auction." Silas's hand slammed down on the desk hard enough to make Morrison jump. "Are you suggesting my wife was carrying another man's child?" "I'm not suggesting anything, just repeating the town talk. You know how people are." "Then you can tell the town that my wife was examined by Dr. Hartwell himself, who confirmed she was not with child when we wed. You can also tell them that anyone who continues to spread such slander will have to answer to me personally. Is that clear?" Morrison paled. "Perfectly clear, Mr. Redman." But the rumors persisted, morphing as they spread. Evelyn was a fortune hunter who had tricked Silas with false claims of barrenness. Evelyn had been pregnant before and lied about it. Evelyn was a woman of loose morals who had been sold at auction because no respectable man would have her. The stories grew more elaborate and more vicious with each telling. Evelyn heard them too, though not from Silas, who tried to shield her from the worst of it. Martha let something slip one afternoon while helping with the baby, then quickly tried to cover her mistake. But Evelyn's sharp mind had already seized on the implication. "What are people saying about me?" she asked directly. Martha's face flushed. "Just nonsense, ma'am. Mean-spirited people with nothing better to do." "Tell me." So, hesitantly and apologetically, Martha told her. When Martha had finished, Evelyn sat in silence for a moment, nursing Thomas, her face an unreadable mask. "I see," she said at last. "Thank you for being honest with me, Martha. That evening, she confronted Silas in his study. Why didn't you tell me what people were saying? Because it is vicious gossip that doesn't deserve your attention. Silas set down his pen. I have been dealing with it. Threatening men at the bank. Morrison had no right. Morrison is a small man who repeats what he hears. The problem isn't him, Silas. It's that people are counting the months and questioning the legitimacy of our son. Evelyn's voice was steady, but he could see the hurt beneath it. Are they saying I'm a liar? That I trapped you? Anyone who says that to my face will live to regret it. Violence won't solve this. She sat down across from him. We need a different approach. Dr. Hartwell examined me when we were first married. He can provide documentation proving I was not with child. We can make it public, put an end to the rumors. No. Silas's voice was flat. We will not subject you to that humiliation. We are not laying your medical history bare for public consumption to satisfy gossips and slanderers. Then what do you suggest? We let them whisper? Let our son grow up with a cloud of doubt over his birth? I suggest we ignore them. We know the truth. That is all that matters. You're wrong. Evelyn leaned forward. The truth only matters if people believe it. Right now, they believe I'm either a liar or that our marriage was built on a deception. It affects you, Silas. It affects your business, your reputation, everything you've built. I don't give a damn about my reputation. Yes, you do, and more importantly, I give a damn about mine. She stood. I will not be reduced to a cautionary tale. I will not be the woman people pity or condemn. I am your wife, the mother of your son, and I have as much right to respect as you do. They stared at each other across the desk, at an impasse. Evelyn left the study with her spine straight and her head held high, but Silas could see the weight she carried. The knowledge that no matter what they did, some people would always question her character, her motives, her worth. Later that night, as they lay in bed with Thomas sleeping in his cradle beside them, Silas pulled Evelyn close. I should have protected you from this, he said quietly. I should have seen it coming. You can't protect me from everything. That's not how a partnership works. Evelyn's head rested on his chest, her breath warm against his skin. But we need to make a decision, Silas. We either fight these rumors publicly, or we prove them wrong with our actions. I prefer the latter. What do you mean? I mean, she said, her voice filled with a new resolve, that we live our lives so openly, so honestly, that the gossip withers from lack of fuel. I will attend church socials. I will join the Ladies' Aid Society. I will become so visible and so unimpeachable that people will feel foolish for ever having doubted me. You would subject yourself to those vultures? I want to show them who I am, instead of letting them decide for themselves. She lifted her head to look at him. Unless you'd prefer I hide away here on the ranch, like some sort of guilty secret. You are not a secret. You are my wife. Then let me be your wife in public, not just in private. And so Evelyn began. She attended church every Sunday, holding her head high as women whispered behind their hands. She joined the Ladies' Aid Society, volunteering for the most menial tasks without complaint. She took Thomas into town, letting people see the healthy, legitimate child of a healthy, legitimate marriage. Slowly, reluctantly, the tide began to turn. It helped that Evelyn was genuinely good at the work she took on. She organized the church fundraiser with such efficiency that they raised twice the expected amount. She personally nursed the banker's wife through the influenza, earning Morrison's grudging gratitude. She befriended the wives of Silas's business associates, displaying an intelligence and competence that made her difficult to dismiss or condemn. But there were still holdouts. There were still those who wanted to believe the worst. The situation came to a head at the Founders' Day celebration in June. Evelyn had organized much of the event, working with the other ladies of the society to create a festival that would bring the whole county together. She was looking forward to it, seeing it as a final chance to prove her worth to the community. She wore her best dress, still plain compared to what the wealthier women wore, but clean and well-fitting, and carried Thomas with pride. Everything was going well until Charlotte Piton arrived. Charlotte was old money, the daughter of the original railroad baron who helped found the county. She had been away at finishing school when Silas married Catherine, and abroad when he married Margaret. This was the first time she had met Evelyn, and she made her opinions clear at once. "So you're the auction bride," Charlotte said, her voice loud enough for a dozen people to hear. She looked Evelyn up and down with undisguised contempt. "How much did Silas pay for you, dear? I heard it was just $1. A bargain, even for him." Evelyn felt every eye turn to her. The noise of the festival seemed to fade away, leaving only Charlotte's mocking voice and the weight of public judgment. "It was $1 precisely," Evelyn replied calmly. "And I'd say both Silas and I received considerably more than we bargained for." "How brave of you to admit it," Charlotte sneered. "Most women would be ashamed to confess they were purchased like livestock. But then, you were desperate, weren't you? No family, no prospects, damaged goods." "That is quite enough." The voice came from behind Evelyn. She turned to see Susan Whitmore, the judge's wife. Mrs. Whitmore was in her 60s and respected throughout the county. At that moment, she was looking at Charlotte with a kind of disapproval that could wither crops. "Charlotte Piton, you should be ashamed of yourself. Mrs. Redman has worked tirelessly on this festival while you were in Europe spending your father's money. She has earned her place here through hard work, not your brand of juvenile cruelty." "I am merely speaking the truth," Charlotte began. "The truth," Susan interrupted, "is that Silas Redman has married an intelligent and capable woman, something neither of his previous marriages could claim. The truth is that Mrs. Redman has contributed more to this community in 6 months than you have in your entire privileged life. And the truth, Charlotte, is that your envy is showing, and it is most unbecoming." Other women began to murmur in agreement. Margaret Chen, who had become Evelyn's friend through the Ladies' Aid Society, stepped forward to stand beside her. Then came Mary Sullivan, Elizabeth Morrison, and even the banker's wife, who owed Evelyn her life. Charlotte suddenly found herself surrounded by women who had decided that Evelyn Redman was more deserving of their loyalty than old prejudices were of being maintained. "Well," Charlotte said, her face flushing, "I can see where loyalties lie. I hope you all enjoy the festival." She swept away, her exit considerably less triumphant than her entrance. Susan turned to Evelyn with a kind smile. "Don't you let that girl rattle you, my dear. She's been spoiled since birth and can't stand for anyone to receive attention that isn't directed at her." "I'm not rattled," Evelyn said, and realized it was true. "In fact, I'm quite moved. Thank you, Mrs. Whitmore. Call me Susan, and you're welcome, though I only spoke the truth." Susan glanced down at Thomas, who had slept through the entire confrontation. "Now, shall we get back to this festival you worked so hard on? I believe the pie judging is about to begin, and I have it on good authority that your apple pie is unbeatable." The rest of the day passed in a blur of activity and fellowship. Word of Charlotte's public humiliation spread quickly, and people went out of their way to be kind to Evelyn, as if apologizing for ever having doubted her. When Silas found her that evening, surrounded by chattering women and cooing babies, Evelyn looked tired but genuinely happy. "You should have seen her, Mr. Redman," Margaret Chen said, animated. Charlotte Python tried to shame her in front of everyone, and Mrs. Redman just stood there so dignified and calm. And then Susan Whitmore put that awful girl right in her place. "It wasn't quite that dramatic," Evelyn protested, but she was smiling. Silas looked at his wife, his partner, holding their son and standing among the women who had chosen to defend her, and he felt something fierce and proud swell in his chest. She had done exactly what she said she would. She had proven her worth through action instead of argument. She had earned respect through competence instead of demanding it. That night, after Thomas was asleep and they were alone in their room, Silas pulled Evelyn into his arms. "You were right," he said simply, "about how to handle the gossip. I should have trusted you. You were trying to protect me. There's no fault in that, Silas. It's just not always possible." She rested her head on his shoulder. "But I think we've turned a corner. People are starting to see me for who I am, rather than who they imagined. They see a woman who is stronger than I am," Silas said softly. "You faced them without flinching. I would have just threatened them." "Different approaches for different situations," Evelyn murmured, leaning back to look at him. "That's what a partnership means. You handle the things that require intimidation. I'll handle the things that require diplomacy. Together, we're formidable." "Formidable," Silas repeated, a smile touching his lips. "That's one word for it. What word would you use?" Instead of answering, he kissed her, and the kiss said everything that words would have made awkward. Gratitude, pride, affection, and something deeper that neither of them was quite ready to name. But it was there, growing stronger with every shared challenge, every moment of partnership, every discovery that what they had built was so much more than a transaction. 6 months later, Evelyn was pregnant again. Thomas was just learning to walk, toddling through the house with Mrs. Chen trailing anxiously behind him, when Evelyn confirmed her suspicions. This time there was no dramatic announcement, no worry about whether it would take. Just a quiet conversation in their bedroom one night. "It seems our partnership continues to be productive," she said, with a touch of dry humor. Silas, who had been pulling off his boots, froze. "Are you certain?" "As certain as I was with Thomas. The signs are all the same." She sat beside him on the bed. "Dr. Hartwell says I'm healthy. The pregnancy is progressing normally, and I should expect another spring baby. 2 children in 2 years." Silas shook his head in wonder. "The barren woman gives me 2 children. We don't know it's a son yet." "A daughter, then?" "I have no preference." He reached out to touch her still flat stomach. "Are you happy about this?" Evelyn considered the question seriously. "I am content. Thomas is a marvel, but he is exhausting. Another baby so soon will be a challenge. But yes, I am happy. This is what we wanted, wasn't it? A family." "It is." Silas drew her closer. "Though I worry for you. The last birth was difficult. All births are difficult. It is the nature of creating life." She kissed his cheek. "But I am stronger now than I was then. I know what to expect. And I have you." "You will always have me," Silas said, and he spoke with an intensity that surprised them both. The second pregnancy was easier than the first, perhaps because Evelyn knew what was coming, perhaps because she was distracted by Thomas's boundless energy. She continued to run the household, though she reluctantly accepted more help from Marta and Mrs. Chen as she grew heavier. But it was during this pregnancy that Evelyn began to take a real interest in Silas's horse breeding program. She had always had a sharp mind for livestock. She had mentioned animal husbandry at that first auction, after all. But she had focused primarily on managing the house. In the first year of their marriage, with systems now in place and staff she trusted, Evelyn found she had time to explore other aspects of the ranch. It began simply by watching. She would walk out to the stables with Thomas, letting him pat the noses of the docile mares while she observed the breeding program with an appraising eye. Silas noticed her interest and began to explain his methods, the bloodlines he was developing, the traits he was trying to enhance, the careful records that tracked each animal's lineage and performance. "What are you thinking?" he said one afternoon, watching her frown at the breeding charts. "I'm thinking that you are focused entirely on physical traits," Evelyn replied. "Size, strength, speed. But what about temperament?" "Temperament? A horse can be a magnificent physical specimen, but it is useless if it is too skittish or aggressive to be properly trained. You are breeding for power, but power needs to be controllable." She pointed to one of the charts. "This stallion you are planning to use. He sired 3 colts so high-strung they had to be sold at a loss. And yet, you keep using him because his conformation is perfect." Silas looked at the chart with new eyes. "I never thought of it that way. Because you're approaching this as a man who wants impressive stock. I'm approaching it as a woman who needs animals that can actually be used." Evelyn's hand drifted to her swollen belly. "If you want to build a breeding program that's truly valuable, you need horses that combine physical excellence with trainability. Otherwise, you're just producing beautiful problems." It was as if a door had opened in Silas's mind. Evelyn was right. He had been so focused on creating stunning specimens that he'd ignored the practical needs of the people who would actually buy and use these horses. In the weeks that followed, he found himself consulting her more and more on breeding decisions, valuing her instinct for balance and practicality, which complemented his own quest for excellence. "You have a gift for this," he said one evening, as they reviewed the breeding ledgers together. "I have a gift for seeing what's needed, not just what's impressive," Evelyn corrected. "It's the same skill I use to run the house. Efficiency and results matter more than appearances." "Then I want you to run the breeding program with me, not just advising, but truly managing it by my side." Evelyn looked up from the ledgers, her expression one of pure surprise. "Silas, women don't run livestock operations." "I know, but this is horse breeding, not cattle. It's considered more refined, more genteel, and you're better at some aspects of it than I am. Why would I ignore that advantage because of some arbitrary rules about what women can and cannot do? Your business partners won't like it. My business partners can adjust their expectations or take their business elsewhere." Silas's voice was firm. "You are my partner, Evelyn, in everything. That includes the parts of this ranch that you actually care about." So Evelyn became deeply involved in the breeding program, and it transformed under her practical influence. They began selecting for temperament alongside physical traits, producing horses that were not only beautiful, but also reliably trainable. Word spread, and buyers began to specifically request Redmond horses for their combination of quality and manageability. The operation was thriving when Evelyn went into labor with their second child in April of 1904. This labor was faster than her first, but harder. The baby was bigger, the delivery more intense, and there came a terrible, endless moment when Dr. Hartwell's face grew taut with worry, and Silas felt his heart stop in his chest. "What is it?" he demanded. The baby's turned sideways, a shoulder presentation. Dr. Hartwell was already rolling up his sleeves. "Mrs. Redmond, I need you to stop pushing for a moment. I have to turn the baby manually, and it is going to hurt." "Do it," Evelyn gasped. "Just do it." What followed was the worst hour of Silas's life. Evelyn's screams seemed to echo in the very walls. There was blood, so much blood, and Dr. Hartwell, working with grim determination while Mrs. Chen held Evelyn's hand, whispering words of encouragement in Chinese. "I can't," Evelyn sobbed at one point. "I can't. It hurts too much." "You can," Silas said fiercely, gripping her other hand. "You are the strongest person I know, Evelyn. You will do this. You will bring our baby into this world, and then you will get well, and we will raise our children together. Do you hear me?" "Together, together," Evelyn whispered, and she found the strength for one more push. The baby girl arrived in a rush of fluid, blood, and desperate cries. Dr. Hartwell caught her, cleared her airway, and laid her on Evelyn's chest, while he and Mrs. Chan-san worked frantically to staunch the bleeding. "She's beautiful," Evelyn said weakly, her face ashen with exhaustion and blood loss. "Silas, is she—" "Don't talk," Silas commanded, his voice raw with fear. "Save your strength. Dr. Hartwell, is she? Will she?" "The bleeding is slowing," the doctor said, though his eyes never left his work. "But Mrs. Redmond has lost a significant amount of blood. The next few hours will be critical." Those hours passed like years. The baby, whom they named Sarah after Evelyn's mother, nursed briefly and then slept in a bassinet by the bed. Thomas was kept downstairs with Marta, blissfully unaware of the crisis, and Silas sat by Evelyn's bedside, holding her hand and praying to a God he'd never much believed in. "Don't you dare leave me," he whispered, as she drifted in and out of consciousness. "Don't you dare, Evelyn Redmond. I can't do this alone. I don't want to do this alone. I need you." Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused. "Bossy?" "Of course I'm bossy. It's why you married me." "I married you for $1. A faint smile touched her pale lips. "Best investment I ever made." "Likewise," Silas said, his throat tight. "Me too, love." The endearment slipped out, raw and honest. Evelyn's eyes widened slightly, then closed again, but her hand tightened in his. "Love?" she murmured. "Took you long enough to say it." Then she slipped into sleep, and Silas sat with her through the night, holding her hand, and finally, admitting what he had denied for months. He loved her. He loved this practical, strong, infuriating woman who had put herself on the auction block and agreed to marry him for $1. He loved her intelligence and her competence and her refusal to be broken by circumstance. He loved the way she had turned his empty house into a home, his cold existence into a life worth living. He loved her with an intensity that terrified him, because it meant she had the power to destroy him simply by leaving. But she didn't leave. By dawn, her color had improved. By afternoon, she was sitting up and nursing Sarah with Marta's help. By evening, Dr. Hartwell declared her out of danger, though he warned that another pregnancy could be fatal. "No more children," the doctor told Silas bluntly in the hall. "Mrs. Redmond is strong, but she is not indestructible. Another hard birth could kill her." "Then there won't be another birth," Silas replied. "2 children are enough." But when he returned to the bedroom and found Evelyn sitting up with Sarah in her arms and Thomas climbing onto the bed beside them, he felt a sharp pang of loss, even as he celebrated their survival. 2 children, when he had wanted a house full of them. 2, when he had dreamed of a dynasty. Evelyn saw it on his face. "You wanted more? I want you alive more than I want more children." Silas sat carefully on the edge of the bed. "Dr. Hartwell says—" "I know what he says. I heard him." She looked down at Sarah's tiny face. "I'm sorry, Silas." "For what?" "For not almost dying to give you a daughter." He lifted her chin gently. "You have nothing to be sorry for, Evelyn. Nothing. We have 2 healthy children, and we have each other. That's more than I ever expected to have. Thomas can run your empire when he's grown, or Sarah can, if she has a mind to. Or we can sell the whole damn thing and live comfortably on the money." Silas's voice was firm. "I don't care, Evelyn. None of it matters if you're not here to share it with me." Tears streamed down her face. "You love me?" "I love you," he confirmed, the words coming easier now that he had admitted them to himself. "I've loved you for months, probably. I was just too stubborn to admit it. It took almost losing you for me to realize that everything I've built, the land, the cattle, the horses, it all means nothing without you." He kissed her forehead gently. "You are my partner in all things, Evelyn. But more than that, you are my love. The only one I've ever had. The only one I'll ever want." "That's the most romantic thing you've ever said to me." "Don't get used to it," Silas replied, but he was smiling through his own tears. "I'm still not good with pretty words." "No," Evelyn agreed, reaching up to touch his face. "But you're getting better with the honest ones. And I love you too, Silas Redmond. I think I have for some time. I was just too practical to say it." They sat like that together, their children between them, acknowledging that their financial transaction had become not just a partnership, not just a convenient arrangement, but something far more valuable and far more perilous. Love. Messy, complicated, and utterly essential. The foundation for everything they would build together in the years to come. The recovery was slow and painful, a fact that frustrated Evelyn more than the physical discomfort itself. She had always prided herself on her strength and capability, and now she found herself as weak as a kitten, dependent on others for basic tasks. Marta brought her meals to the bedroom. Mrs. Chen handled the baby's washing and changing when Evelyn was too exhausted. Even 2-year-old Thomas seemed to understand that something was wrong with Mama, climbing carefully onto the bed to pat her hand with his chubby fingers. "Better?" he would ask hopefully, and Evelyn would force a smile and assure him that yes, Mama was getting better. But privately, to Silas, she admitted her fears. "What if I can't do it anymore?" she said one night, her voice barely a whisper. Sarah was asleep in her bassinet, and Thomas had been settled in the nursery down the hall. "What if I can't run the house? Can't help with the horses? Can't be the partner you need?" Silas, who had been reading breeding ledgers by the lamplight, set the papers aside immediately. "Evelyn, you nearly died 3 weeks ago. The fact that you're conscious and talking is a miracle. The rest will come. But what if it doesn't? What if this is me now, weak and useless? You are neither of those things. He sat on the bed beside her, taking her hand gently. You are recovering. That takes time. And even if you never ran the house the same way again, even if you never set foot in the stables again, you would still be my wife, the woman I love, the mother of my children. Your value is not measured by your productivity, Evelyn. Isn't it? She gave a bitter laugh. That's how you chose me. That's what our whole arrangement was based on, my ability to be useful. That was before. Silas's voice was firm. Before I knew you. Before I understood what we were building together. Yes. Initially, I valued your competence. Now, I value you. There is a difference. Words are easy, Silas. Then let me prove it with actions. He stood and went to his desk, returning with a leather folio. I've been working on something while you've been recovering. I want you to see it. Evelyn opened the folio and found herself looking at legal documents. It took her a moment to understand what she was reading. When she did, her hands began to tremble. This is a deed, she said slowly. To the eastern pasture, Silas confirmed. 500 acres. In your name. And it's not just the land. The papers behind it establish your sole ownership of the horse breeding program, separate from my cattle operations. You will have full authority over breeding decisions, sales, profits. It is yours, Evelyn, not ours. Yours. I don't understand. Why would you? Because I've been thinking about what Dr. Hartwell said, about another pregnancy, about how we need to be more careful. Silas's jaw tensed. I've been thinking about Catherine, who died with nothing to her name but what I gave her. About Margaret, who left with only the clothes on her back because legally, everything belonged to me. I don't want that for you, Evelyn. If something happens to me, I want you to be secure. And if something happens to you... His voice broke for a fraction of a second. If something happens to you, I want you to know that you built something. That you weren't just my wife, but a person with her own accomplishments. Evelyn stared at the documents, tears now streaming down her face. In 1904, women had virtually no property rights. Everything she had built, everything she had contributed, legally belonged to Silas. This deed, these papers, represented something revolutionary, an acknowledgement of her as an equal partner, not just in word, but in law. This is the most extraordinary gift anyone has ever given me, she whispered. It's not a gift. It's an acknowledgement of what you've earned, Silas said, sitting beside her again. You transformed my breeding program, Evelyn. The reputation we're building, the quality of our stock, the prices we're commanding. That's as much your work as it is mine. Maybe more so. You deserve to profit from your own labor. Society will think you're mad, giving land and ownership of a business to your wife. Society thought we were mad to get married in the first place, Silas cut in. I stopped caring what society thinks when I paid $1 for the best thing that ever happened to me. Evelyn set the folio carefully aside and reached for him, pulling him into a hug that was awkward with her weakness, but desperately needed. I love you, she said, with fierce intensity. I love you so much, it frightens me. Good, Silas murmured against her hair. Because you scare me too, in the best possible way. By summer, Evelyn had regained most of her strength. Though she tired more easily than before and occasionally needed to rest in the afternoons, her mind was as sharp as ever. She threw herself into the development of the horse breeding program with a renewed passion. The deed in her name was not merely a symbol, it was a responsibility she took to heart. She began keeping meticulous records, tracking not only physical characteristics, but also behavioral patterns across all bloodlines. She corresponded with breeders in other states, exchanging information and expanding her knowledge. She visited other ranches to observe their methods, sometimes taking Thomas with her, teaching the boy how to appraise a horse even at his tender age. "That one's too skittish," Thomas would announce solemnly, pointing to a flighty mare, and Evelyn would smile, because he had learned to recognize the same signs she looked for. The breeding program flourished under her management. Within a year, Redman horses were fetching premium prices in 3 states, known for their exceptional blend of beauty and trainability. Buyers specifically requested to work with Mrs. Redman, and Evelyn found herself negotiating deals that would have been impossible for most women. But success bred resentment, especially from men who disliked seeing a woman operate so visibly in what they considered male territory. The crisis struck in the spring of 1906, when 3 valuable horses vanished from the Redmond stables overnight. The theft itself was serious enough, but what followed nearly destroyed everything they had built. Silas was in Omaha on business when it happened, leaving Evelyn to manage the fallout. She immediately notified the sheriff, organized search parties, and offered a substantial reward for information leading to the animals' recovery. The horses were found 3 days later on a ranch 40 miles to the south. The owner, a man named Jack Dalton, who had competed unsuccessfully against Redmond stock in several shows, claimed to have bought them legally. "I have the bill of sale," Dalton insisted, producing a document bearing what looked like Silas's signature. "Paid $500 for the 3 of them, fair and square." The sheriff eyed the bill of sale warily. "It looks like Mr. Redmond's signature, but it's a forgery," Evelyn said flatly. She had brought the ranch's financial records with her. "We have no record of this transaction, no corresponding payment. More importantly, those horses are not for sale. They are breeding stock." "Maybe your husband made a private deal and didn't tell you," Dalton suggested, a sly grin playing on his lips. "Maybe he doesn't share all his business with the wife." "My husband shares everything with me," Evelyn replied coolly. "We are partners. And even if he had decided to sell breeding stock, which he would not do without consulting me, he would never accept such a ridiculously low price. Those 3 horses are worth at least $2,000 together." "That's quite a claim, Mrs. Redman. You have proof of their value?" Evelyn produced another set of documents: breeding records, lineage information, sales comparisons. She had come prepared, and Dalton's sarcastic smile began to fade as she systematically dismantled his story. But the sheriff seemed uncertain, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. "This is a serious accusation," he said cautiously. "Horse theft is a hanging offense in some parts. Are you saying Mr. Dalton is a thief based on your word against his bill of sale?" "I am saying someone forged my husband's signature and sold stolen property to Mr. Dalton," Evelyn corrected. "Whether Mr. Dalton was complicit in the theft or merely a buyer of stolen goods, I cannot say. But those horses are ours, and we want them back." The case went to court. It should have been simple, but Dalton's lawyer was clever, and he focused the case on Evelyn instead of the stolen horses. "Gentlemen of the jury," he said smoothly during his opening statement, "we have here a woman who claims to manage a horse breeding operation. A woman who has taken it upon herself to conduct business negotiations, handle financial records, and make decisions about valuable property. But is Mrs. Redman truly competent to make such claims? Or is she a woman who has overstepped her bounds? Perhaps she made mistakes she is now trying to cover up by accusing an innocent man of theft. Evelyn sat in the courtroom beside their lawyer, Marcus Webb, and felt a slow, hot anger begin to coil in her chest. This was no longer about the horses. This was about whether a woman could be trusted to mind her own business. "They're putting you on trial instead of Dalton," Marcus murmured, "trying to make this about your credibility instead of the facts." "Then we will have to make it about the facts," Evelyn replied. "I want to testify." "Mrs. Redman, I'm not sure that's wise." "I am." Her voice was firm. "These are my horses, my breeding program, my reputation. I will not let some thief and his lawyer diminish what I have built simply because I am a woman." When Evelyn took the witness stand the next day, Dalton's lawyer approached with a thinly veiled condescension. "Mrs. Redman claims to manage a horse breeding operation. Can you please explain to the jury what qualifies you for such a role?" 14 years of experience with livestock," Evelyn answered calmly. 4 years managing my first husband's farm. 10 years working with breeding programs, including the last 4 developing the Redman program. I know how to judge conformation, assess bloodlines, predict breeding outcomes, and train difficult animals. I have studied agricultural science journals, corresponded with breeders across the country, and have personally overseen the birth and training of over 60 foals. Quite impressive for a woman. The lawyer's smile was dismissive. "But surely your husband makes the real decisions. You are more of an assistant." "My husband and I are partners. We make decisions together. But the breeding program is under my direct management, as documented in the deed Mr. Redman signed, giving me ownership of that part of the operation." A murmur swept through the courtroom. The lawyer's expression soured. "A deed, you say? How convenient. Can you produce this alleged deed?" "I can, and I have. It was filed with the county clerk's office 18 months ago. It is a public document." The lawyer shifted tactics. "Mrs. Redman, is it not true that you yourself were acquired at a mail-order bride event in Council Bluffs? That you came into this marriage with nothing, no credentials, no standing?" "Objection!" Marcus was on his feet. "Relevance. I am establishing the witness's background and credibility, Your Honor." The judge frowned but allowed it. Evelyn took a deep breath, feeling every eye in the courtroom on her. This was it. The moment her past would either vindicate her or condemn her. "Yes," she said clearly. "I was at a matrimonial agency event in Council Bluffs. I was a widow, destitute, and seeking a practical arrangement that would ensure my survival. Mr. Redman offered such an arrangement. We were married, and I have spent the last 4 years proving that my circumstances do not define my abilities." "So you married for money?" "I married to survive. There is a difference. And now you claim ownership of valuable assets and business operations. Isn't it possible, Mrs. Redman, that you are an opportunist who has manipulated her husband into giving you assets you have not earned?" The courtroom erupted. The judge hammered his gavel. Marcus was shouting objections, but Evelyn just sat with her hands folded calmly in her lap. When the noise died down, she spoke into the silence. "Mr. Dalton's lawyer wants you to believe I am a fraud, because I started with nothing. But starting with nothing does not make me incompetent. It makes me resourceful. He wants you to believe I manipulated my husband. But the deed was my husband's idea, not mine. He recognized my contributions and made them official. That is not manipulation. It is partnership. She looked directly at the jury, meeting each man's eyes one by one. Those 3 horses were stolen from my stables. I can prove their lineage, their value, and the forgery on the bill of sale. But this case isn't really about horses, is it? It's about whether you, gentlemen, believe a woman can be competent in business. Whether a woman who started with nothing can build something worth stealing. Whether my word has value simply because I have earned the right to give it. Your Honor, the lawyer began. I am not finished, Evelyn said firmly. Mr. Dalton wants to keep horses that do not belong to him. His lawyer wants to make this about my gender and my past instead of about theft and forgery. But the facts are simple. Those horses are mine. The bill of sale is a fake. And no amount of questions about my past changes those fundamental truths. She sat back, her heart pounding, and waited. The trial continued for another day, with Marcus presenting evidence of the forgery, testimony from ranch hands who witnessed the horses being taken, and expert appraisals of the animal's value. But everyone knew the verdict would come down to credibility, Dalton's word against Evelyn's. The jury deliberated for 3 hours. When they returned, the foreman stood and delivered the verdict. We find in favor of Mrs. Redman. The horses are to be returned to the Redman Ranch immediately, and Mr. Dalton is ordered to pay for damages. Evelyn felt her knees go weak with relief. Marcus steadied her arm as the courtroom buzzed with reactions. Some people looked pleased, others disappointed, but they were all talking about the woman who had stood up in court and defended her own business. Silas, who had returned from Omaha mid-trial and sat silently in the back, met her outside. He said nothing, just pulled her into his arms and held her as she trembled with the delayed reaction. You were magnificent, he said finally. Terrifying and magnificent. I was so afraid they wouldn't believe me. They would have been fools not to. Silas drew back to look at her face. You made them see what I've known for years, that you are formidable, Evelyn Redman, that you have earned everything you have, and anyone who doubts it is a fool. Some people will always doubt, Evelyn said, weary. Because I am a woman who does not stay in her place. Good. Stay out of your place. Keep making people uncomfortable. Keep proving them wrong. Silas's voice was fierce. And know that I will be right beside you every step of the way. The victory established something important, not just the return of the stolen horses, but the public acknowledgement of Evelyn's competence. Newspapers covered the trial. While some editorials decried her unwomanly behavior, others praised her business acumen. Orders for Redman horses increased as buyers realized the program was run by someone who clearly knew what she was doing, regardless of gender. But the stress of the trial, combined with her still recovering health, took its toll. 3 weeks later, Evelyn collapsed while working in the stables. Silas found her unconscious in an empty stall. Dr. Hartwell was summoned urgently and spent 2 hours examining her before emerging from the bedroom with a grave expression. Her body never fully recovered from Sarah's birth, he told Silas. The trial, the stress, the long hours she's been putting in. It's too much, too soon. Mrs. Redman needs complete rest, Mr. Redman. Not a few days. Months. How many months? 6 at a minimum. No work, no stress, no responsibilities beyond basic care for herself. If she doesn't rest now, the damage could be permanent. Silas sank heavily into a chair in the hall. She won't agree to that. You know she won't. Then you need to make her agree. Dr. Hartwell's voice was stern. Your wife survived something that kills many women. She has built an impressive business and defended it in court. She is hard as rock, but even rock can break, Mr. Redman. And if she breaks, you won't be able to put her back together. So Silas did something he had never done before. He made an executive decision about their partnership. He hired additional household staff. He brought in an experienced horse trainer named Daniel Morrison to manage the day-to-day operations of the breeding program, under Evelyn's final oversight. He took over the bookkeeping and correspondence himself, and told Evelyn, in no uncertain terms, that she was taking 6 months off. You can't just decide that, Evelyn protested weakly from the bed where she had been confined for a week. The breeding program needs me. We have contracts to fulfill. The clients who want a Redman horse need you alive and well, Silas countered. They don't need you dead at 32 because you worked yourself into the grave. Daniel knows horses. He can handle the daily operations. I can handle the business end. What none of us can handle is losing you. No buts, Evelyn. This is not a negotiation. He sat on the edge of the bed, his expression relentless. You spent 4 years building this partnership, proving your worth, fighting for respect. Now let me fight for you. Let me protect what we have, and make sure you're around to enjoy it. You're being bossy. Yes, I am. Because you're too stubborn to protect yourself, so someone has to. His hand found hers. I almost lost you when Sarah was born. I won't risk that again. Not for the horses, not for the business, not for anything. You are more important than all of it combined. Evelyn's eyes filled with tears. I'm not good at resting, Silas. I don't know how to just be, without a purpose. Then we'll find you quiet purposes. Read those books you've been meaning to get to. Spend time with Thomas and Sarah. Teach me how to handle the breeding correspondence so I don't embarrass us. But you are resting, Evelyn. That's final. So she rested, and it nearly drove her mad. The first month was the worst. She would lie in bed or sit in the chair by the window, watching the ranch operations continue without her, feeling useless and redundant. Thomas would visit, bringing her flowers and talking about the horses. Sarah was learning to walk, toddling across the room with Mrs. Shane hovering nervously nearby. Caleb reached out with his good hand and cupped her face. I love you too. You brought my life back from the dead. You made me remember what it means to hope, to build, to care about tomorrow. You're the best thing that ever happened to me, even if you came to me in the strangest circumstances imaginable. They kissed, a kiss of tenderness and depth, a reaffirmation of their vows and their commitment. The violence of the day fell away. All that mattered was this: two people who had found each other against all odds, who had fought together, and who had built something real and lasting from the rubble of their past lives. Let's go home tomorrow, Eleanor said. Back to our mountain, our land, our life. Home, Caleb agreed. That sounds perfect. And for the first time since Dalton had made his move, they both slept in peace, knowing the threat was gone and the future was theirs to shape. The doctor's office was 3 buildings down from the courthouse. Deputies escorted Caleb there, while Eleanor kept firm, steady pressure on the wound, her own fear held tightly in check. The bullet had torn through the flesh of his shoulder, missing bone and major blood vessels. Painful, but not fatal, the doctor confirmed after a swift examination. You're a lucky man, he said, cleaning and dressing the wound. An inch to the right, and we'd be having a very different conversation. It wasn't luck, Caleb said, his gaze fixed on Eleanor. It was purpose. I had something worth protecting. Back at the courthouse, Dalton was in chains, his men disarmed and in custody. The veneer of respectability he had curated for years was shattered. By attempting to shoot Eleanor, he had proven every accusation against him, that he saw her as property to be controlled or destroyed, that he was willing to use violence to get his way, that he valued power above the law. Marshal Clayton went about his work with efficient authority. Dalton was formally charged with attempted murder, on top of the existing charges of fraud and forgery. His lawyer, seeing the catastrophic turn of events, quietly distanced himself from the case. Other officials who had been in Dalton's pocket suddenly found urgent business elsewhere. By the afternoon, Caleb was bandaged and immobile, his arm in a sling. He and Eleanor returned to the courthouse for the final proceedings. Judge Blackwood, looking shaken by the violence that had erupted in his courtroom, addressed the assembly. This court recognizes that the documents presented by Thomas Dalton concerning Eleanor Stone were fraudulent. The marriage between Caleb Stone and Eleanor Hartwell Stone is legitimate and lawful. Mrs. Stone is a free citizen with full rights and privileges. Furthermore, this court recognizes the broader pattern of corruption and fraud perpetrated by Mr. Dalton, and orders a full investigation into all land transactions he has been involved in for the past 5 years. He looked at Eleanor with something akin to respect. Mrs. Stone, my apologies that you were subjected to this ordeal. You have conducted yourself with remarkable dignity and courage. Eleanor rose, still holding Caleb's good hand. Thank you, Your Honor. But I am not the only victim here. There are families all over this territory who lost their land and their livelihoods to Dalton's schemes. I hope justice will extend to them as well. It will, Marshal Clayton assured her. We will be conducting a full review. Any families with proof of fraud or coercion should come forward. Properties taken unlawfully will be returned. Within hours, the stories began to pour out. Families who had been too afraid to speak up now found courage in Eleanor's example. The full extent of Dalton's corruption became clear. Dozens of homesteads had been acquired through fraudulent papers, intimidation, and legal manipulation. He had built an empire on the suffering of others, and now that empire was crumbling. As the sun set, Caleb and Eleanor finally left the courthouse. They were exhausted, drained by the day's events, but also profoundly relieved. It was over. Truly, finally over. Dalton was going to prison. His false claims were nullified. Their marriage was secure. Mrs. Anderson was waiting outside with the other women who had come to support them. Well, she said with satisfaction, that's that. Now let's get you two home. You've had enough excitement for one day. They spent the night in the capital, at a modest boarding house. The owner, hearing who they were and what had happened, refused to take their payment. You stood up to a bully, she said simply. That takes courage. Your money's no good here. That night, in their rented room, Eleanor helped Caleb change his dressing. Her hands were gentle as she cleaned the wound and applied the salve the doctor had provided. You took a bullet for me, she said softly. You could have died. So could you, Caleb replied. He looked at her. This woman he had won in a poker game, the woman who had given him back his life. 6 months passed, and spring returned to the mountains of Montana. The snow that had blanketed the peaks all winter began to retreat, and the earth awoke with new growth. Caleb's shoulder had healed well, though it ached when the weather turned. a permanent reminder of the day he had stood between violence and the woman he loved. The seeds Eleanor had planted, both literal and metaphorical, had survived the storm. They had evidence and they had a community at their side. What had started as a few rows of crops had grown into solidarity, resistance, and the courage to face down injustice. Now they could grow without fear, nourished by love and protected by justice. Whatever came next, they would face it together.